Wait for it. And we are live. Hello, everyone. Josh and Nari in person. And in 9 years of podcasting and blogging, first I'm actually doing a live stream in the same room. So it's weird to actually, like, we're not at the same height because of just being on monitor. So like,
I was going to say, Zoom is a great equalizer in that sense.
Yeah, so it's very, very surreal. It's like, oh, you are human. You're not two-dimensional. And so here we are to discuss Star Trek Lower Decks season 2 finale, first contact. Nari, what did you think of this episode?
I really loved it. It was top to bottom, both hilarious and it was interesting. It was action packed. I really have enjoyed the balance that Lower Decks has always struck between being sort of just a really funny show and also being a really interesting sci-fi show. And this one just highlighted how well they've struck that balance. It was gripping at the same time as it was hilarious.
Absolutely. And they have fun.
Oh yes.
And it's wonderful to see a Star Trek show written by people who love Star Trek. And that shows. And we get to see several long-running jokes pay off. We get to see callbacks to things from season 1. And there's just a lot there. Plus, you also get Star Trek is really good at found family, and in this case, family.
Yes.
And we've seen the parent relationship before, such as Spock and his dad, Savick. And that played out very well in different, whether it was Journey to Babel or Star Trek 3 or Star Trek 4, with how they interacted. This, with the mommy-daughter reaction, I've been enjoying it, seeing just sort of like, okay, that's nice. That's fun stuff.
Yes.
So, but let's talk about what happens with Captain Freeman's going to get offered a promotion. Mariner does not react well to that. So I don't know if that's if there's abandonment issues, like what's going on here. But she does not react well to mom going to a bigger and better ship, potentially. So she inadvertently eavesdrops, and things go downhill from there. Now, apparently they go to the captain's yacht, something that we first saw in Star Trek Insurrection, with the Enterprise E had a yacht.
Yes.
And
I just want to so we're skipping over the events in the first sequence involving the explosion of the planetoid. And at this point, the crew is now attempting to deal with the crisis. So there's two things that we can discuss here that happen on the captain's yacht.
No, keep going.
The first one, and I just want to mention it briefly, is in a long-running series of things for Mariner is, failure to follow orders. Disobeying an order from a superior officer, as you covered last time, a lawful order at least, is an offense in the UCMJ. It will get you demoted if not punished for other things in other ways. So that's just a theme for Mariner at this point. I think the things that's been saving her, as they discuss in the show, is the fact that the captain is her mom. But in any event, the other thing that I thought was interesting is that in a series of things that Rutherford and Tendi are doing in order to celebrate, I guess, or appreciate the ship, because Tendi believes that she will be departing it, they end up, I believe it's having ice cream on the captain's yacht.
So I like boats a lot, and I do like ice cream a lot. So I see nothing wrong with that plan. Now, on the flip side, this is supposed to be forbidden to go on board the captain's yacht. And we find out why it could be forbidden.
Yes. So as with any workplace, there are places that employees have basically the permission to go to and places where maybe they don't.
Like, I don't hang out in the managing partner's office.
Exactly. If you happen to walk in there and start messing around with his shelves or something, he might consider that a trespass.
I value my job. That's a bad life choice.
Yes, and there isn't a special law, as far as I'm aware, for employee trespass, but it's just the typical traditional definition of trespass, which is, at least under California law, is defined as entering or remaining on someone else's property without permission or right to do so. So in this case, an employer gives an employee a permission to be on their premises, but that permission might be limited to specific places and specific times, right? So like if an employee comes back to a shop after it's closed up, nobody's there, and then enters, they might be trespassing because they don't have permission to be there at that time. So in this case, Josh,
so
are they trespassing?
Solid, I would say yes, unequivocally, because we get the military side of it. And here's why.
They hide when they're caught. Continue.
Yeah, there's that, because nothing says innocence like hiding. Yeah, it just doesn't. That doesn't mean that only the guilty fear of the police state.
No, exactly. And they could be embarrassed about something else, including the fact that they are hanging out alone together eating ice cream. I don't know, but
see nothing wrong with that. Anyway, where I was going with this is, if you go into a galley on a warship or a military base, there's not just like the officer section for where they eat, but like the captain's table. You don't just go sit at the captain's table. Like that's something you get invited to. And frequently the captains will eat alone. And that's how they roll. On the flip side, sometimes people go like, hey, can I join you? Or the captain would invite the person over. But that's normal. And now there are, tradition in the Navy, not so much the Coast Guard, though. I've never heard of it, but like an aircraft carrier could have a captain's gig, which could be, aircraft carriers 1,000 feet long, give or take. They could have a little 40-foot fiberglass boat that can shuttle the captain around places when they're in port. That's normal. So we don't call them yachts, we call them gigs. Calling it unfortunately, yacht can have a pretentious quality to it, and that's not fair. Not everything's like an America's Cup boat race.
It literally means a certain class of ship, right?
Yeah. It's for like nice sailing and fast. Mm-hmm. And generally, a yacht is a sailboat. You can have power boats that fall into that category, but the traditional, it's you think the America's Cup. You think in terms of something elegant, mm-hmm. not ugly and tacky, which some of the large power yachts look like, in my opinion. It's like, why would you do that? Why? On the flip side, there's one that's it's like a 65-foot yacht and submarine. That sounds nice, but again, I have a mild Captain Nemo complex. It's under control, But so they go on board. So yeah, I do think they're trespassing.
Yes, it seems like they probably don't have permission to be on the captain's yacht. They don't have a work reason to be there. So yeah, they're probably trespassing. Are they going to get in trouble for it? No, because they managed to save the day, of course. But
so there's the tradition side of why you don't go on board there. But I think the practical side was that's where the captain and her daughter would go to have mommy-daughter arguments.
That is what it seems like. Yeah.
Maybe even cast off for a bit so they can scream at each other. Yep, that seems, you don't want to hear the captain and, the kid screaming at each other. That's bad for morale on all kinds of levels. So,
as we have seen
in
this show.
And like this episode, like yes. it can really freak out people that, mariners were just so discontent with the senior staff. Mm-hmm. Who felt like they were being abandoned.
Yes.
And Mariner did that intentionally, which once again, it falls into that unbecoming catch-all that the military has. Mm-hmm. But why is all this happening? Well, a little planetoid exploded because of a solar flare. Mm-hmm. And the USS Archimedes, captained by Sonia Gomez, who we saw in 2 Next Gen episodes, where she spilled coffee on Captain Picard.
I did not remember that. So my God.
Same actress voiced the character.
Oh my God, that is so cool.
So when her ensign trips in front of her, and
I get it now. Oh my God, I get it now.
It's okay, I've done worse. It's like, yeah, you didn't like douse Jean-Luc Picard in hot coffee. So yeah, but again, she seems really cool in a nice command style, which is what you want in a leader.
Mhm.
Having that, it's more than just servant leader, but they talk the talk and walk the walk.
Mm-hmm.
When they're trying to fix the ship, like she's underneath a shuttlecraft, and she's totally in like shop girl look. And just like rock
I
on.
think there's some literal elbow grease there.
Literally, yeah. I mean, she's got oil on her face.
Yep.
She's doing her thing to save her crew. Like it's just rock on. And again, nice command style.
Yes.
So that raises a big issue with the duty to rescue. And we have two elements here: rescuing the Archimedes, which again I think of. I need to verify this, but I think of the mechanical bird from Clash of the Titans. I might be wrong on that. And the Leperians, who they were really close to honoring live long and prosper. I don't know if that was their intent or not, but normally that would be LLAP, live long and prosper, and this is LAAP.
I see.
So I'm not sure what they're trying to do with the lap system, other than if they were just having some fun with, let's make up a word. I don't.
Maybe somebody watching this can let us know if that was intentional.
Please. So, Nari, what's the duty to rescue? And let's apply the test to both situations that we have.
Yeah, so in general, this may be different. Also, I think you've talked a number of times about like duty to aid other vessels. But speaking more in generalities, there is no general duty at common law. So that means that unless there's a statute that says otherwise, to rescue someone from an imminent harm, unless you have a special relationship with that person. So while it is bad and you would be a jerk if you see someone, maybe a child, drowning, and don't jump in the water and rescue them as a hopefully, full-bodied adult, and you don't help, you would be a jerk. It would be really bad. You would probably be rightly called out as being heartless and horrible. But you would not have legal liability for having failed to help someone who is drowning. This is like, I think there's sometimes the age-old hypothetical of like the rich man walking by and doesn't want to ruin his $100 shoes, and so doesn't jump in to save the drowned. So in any event, obviously bad, not necessarily a legal problem, unless you have the special relationship. So there are sometimes Good Samaritan laws, although the Good Samaritan laws are normally instead geared towards
defending.
Yes, protecting someone who, with good intent, attempts to help someone and ends up causing harm, or fails in their attempt to rescue someone. It's just to shield them from liability, so we're not disincentivizing people from being good Samaritans.
We want people to feel motivated to go save the drowning child. Like this is, oh look, somebody's hurt on the train tracks. I will go render aid. We want to reward that conduct.
Yes, and if you pick them up from the train tracks and then it injures their arm as you're picking them up, you don't want to then have that person be able to sue you for having attempted to save them.
Yeah, exactly. So
it also, I just want to flag one more nuance on that, which it's also comes into play. Good Samaritan laws are often passed also protect specifically doctors. Yeah. So with the, is there a doctor in the house? And then the person attempts to help, does something wrong. You don't want that doctor, when someone puts up their hand and says, is there a doctor in the house? You don't want them to be thinking, could I get sued for malpractice?
I had an experience on that back in 2004, flying back to Massachusetts for a scout event. Someone went to the back of the galley with her adult mother. So again, it's woman in her 60s, woman in her 30s type situation. Woman in her 30s collapsed and looked like was having a seizure. And the mother started yelling code red, which scared the hell out of everyone on the airplane, especially in 2004 because
goodness gracious.
Because of, the unpleasantness that happened. And I was on the aisle, seated at the window seat, was a woman who was a nurse. And she was really going like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this because of the paperwork involved.
Oh, crap.
And so eventually it's like, it took her like 5 seconds, but she jumped over her husband and she wore combat boots, I know, because
Ooh.
she landed on me and used me as a springboard. I will remember that for a long time. And then went back and helped the lady in distress, and everyone was okay. Everyone on the plane did groan when we turned, but we weren't turning to land someplace because we did make it to Boston.
Okay.
But yeah, it was one of those moments of like, yeah. But again, she was afraid of all the paperwork. She could have just sat there and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna sit this one out. But because she was a good human being, she pivoted off me and then left to go save people.
So this is why Good Samaritan laws are generally a good idea.
Yeah, exactly. I did not file charges. So,
yes.
so when we look at the situation of the Federation did not cause a solar flare. They did not cause the planetoid to explode. The exploding planetoid knocked out the Archimedes. And now the Archimedes is a large projectile with a warp core full of antimatter tumbling towards.
This is at least a city-ending event, right?
Yeah. It wouldn't. Yeah, it would definitely.
At least a city killer.
So it's definitely going to kill a few million people.
I don't know if it's going to wipe out the whole planet, but it's still not just like an oopsie daisy.
Anything with a mushroom cloud is a bad day. And again, trying to explain, we're sorry. There's no Hallmark card for that.
Oh God, yeah.
So is there a duty to go rescue the Archimedes or a duty to rescue the planet? So let's take the Archimedes first. What do you think?
So in this instance, probably based off of two things. The first is something that we've talked about before that I will let you talk in more detail about, because if our viewers did not gather from your discussion of yachts, you know a lot more about ships and maritime law than I do.
Yeah, I like boats, so yeah, that makes sense.
The other one is that there is a special relationship between, or for people whose job is to rescue people. So in this instance, you definitely have an argument that the crew of the Cerritos, who is Starfleet, has an obligation to rescue another vessel.
Yeah, especially one of their own.
Yes.
And even if they, like this goes back to different Trek episodes. There was one of the episodes of Discovery Season 2 with Pike, when they decided to go rescue, why am I blanking on her name? Tilly. And Pike gives the speech of, I'll die for you, you die for me, and we're going to go save one of our own. And like, this is a ship full of 1,000 people. So it's like, yeah, it's bad for morale if we just let them tumble to their deaths.
Yeah, there are good policy reasons why you would risk larger numbers of people, even in a military organization, for smaller numbers of people, and one of them is morale.
Yeah, and like we have a long history of doing that. Our service people get very upset when we leave people to die. And that stem even goes as far as recovering bodies. And like, we're still doing that for people we lost in World War II. So there's a strong tradition. It might not be
I think that may be an ongoing issue with North Korea as well.
Probably. We lost lots of people, and I don't know if we got all the remains home from Vietnam.
Yeah.
So like we actually have divisions of the military that just deal with that. That's their job. So putting the spin on this for our starships that we have here, it probably isn't a written order, because if you create an affirmative duty to go rescue other ships, that could get problematic. But also think of the Coast Guard's unofficial motto of you have to go out, you don't have to come back. And that tracks here as well. Like, we're not going to just leave them to die. We don't want to get left to die. So we're in a position to help, which again is one of the big themes from Star Trek. You think back to City on the Edge of Forever, with Kirk talking with Edith Keeler, and how do they describe it? One of the most important phrases in language is either "How can I help?" or "Let me help." And Star Trek does that, and this is a situation of like, yeah, we're going to go help.
And I want to note it's not a suicide mission. They have a theory for how they're going to rescue the ship. It's just a very dangerous mission, and there's a big difference.
Yeah, so they could literally just sit it out and be like, yeah, we're going to watch thousands of people die. And it's on a planet that we want to go make friends with. So, yeah, somebody who just figured out warp technology.
I also just want to use this example of the Archimedes crashing into the planet. It's also a great illustration for any law professors out there who want to talk about superseding causes. So the Archimedes crashing into the planet, it seems like they're the proximate cause of whatever destruction happens. There is, however, a potential superseding cause that was not predicted. It was not predictable, which is this seemingly random solar flare, which then interacted with this planetoid in a way that nobody seems to have expected. So that would be a great little hypo if anybody wants to use that.
In case we start doing exams for folks. So let's pivot to the planet. We want to go make friends with these guys. We don't want to blow up a city on accident.
And they seem very friendly.
They seem like a rip-roaring good time.
Yes.
And yeah, that's high risk right there. So you factor that in. If we hadn't been here, none of this would be happening.
That's what I meant by like seems like the proximate cause, or there's certainly a but-for cause. That is true.
Even though that they are an innocent actor in it. It's like, I wasn't expected to be turned into a projectile.
Yes. Yeah, so this would be like, being in a car and then there's an earthquake and then your car gets shoved into another car. Technically a but-for cause, but you were not the proximate cause of the accident.
Yeah, if I hadn't gone off the cliff, I would not have hit the blimp. Like that sort of extreme situation. Like, that's really not foreseeable. Like,
not intended and not foreseen. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's a spin on Paul's graph. Because there's liability cannot exist in the air, and in this case, space.
Yes.
But that said, the Cerritos arguably would be under an obligation to go, we can't let a planet get screwed like that.
Especially because Starfleet does seem to be part of their job description. Query whether it's actually, like you said, written in their job description. It does seem to be part of their job description that they attempt to help and rescue others, including in this case, a prospective member of the Federation. Like, there's interesting questions in older episodes about another series about whether you can intervene to help a pre-warp civilization that's facing a planet-ending asteroid or things like that. But in this case, it's not pre-warp. They're making first contact, and there's at least city-killing event, possibly planet-ending, about to happen.
Or continent.
And it makes it worse that they are a but-for cause of that planet-killing event, right? But even if they weren't the cause of it, arguably it may be their job to rescue planets from imminent destruction.
Yeah, and the other half of this that I think is
inhabited planets. Sorry.
So this is dark on where it's going. But again, we were alluding to 9/11 earlier, where planes were weaponized and flown into buildings. Flight 93 was in the air. Orders were issued to shoot it down. You could have had a similar situation of, we can't stop it, we can't save them. Do we shoot down the Archimedes in order to make sure it doesn't kill a few million people? And
I'm very grateful they came up with a plan that was not that.
Yeah.
I think because it's a funny show, they also don't seem to have debated that. But if this were a different type of Star Trek show, that would have been discussed openly.
Yeah, it's like, do we have to blow it up? Because
I mean, there's a lot of people on a ship, but there were a lot more people just in that city it appeared to be crashing into. And if it was, in fact, a planet-killing event, I'm assuming millions and millions of people on the planet.
That also goes to the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, which would, again, suck. Because it's like, we don't want to shoot down one of our own.
Yeah.
And again, thinking back to the interviews with the pilot, they're like, she didn't want to do that. So Luckily, that doesn't happen, and it hasn't.
Yes, because this is a happy show.
Yeah, it's not the nihilistic Star Trek where everything bad happens. But Star Trek helps save the whales. Well, now
Star Trek does have a unique relationship with cetaceans.
And these beluga whales need either a good visit from HR or we have to sue the whales. And so let's talk about those beluga whales and what part of the ship is this again?
I wasn't completely clear because I have never seen a section of the ship filled with liquid before.
Yeah, and is it supposed to be for navigation or stellar cartography?
It seems to just be their living environment.
So they either have some whales that they just took with them, but they're Starfleet officers.
Yes, they're in uniform, right? Yeah.
And they're belugas, which if you've ever gotten to see belugas, they are pretty cool. I mean, like they do have kind of the front-facing face, and they can squirt water, and it's just, I mean, they're wonderful, beautiful, intelligent animals. And it's kind of not a surprise to see that they're, in space and they got a job, but they're a tad pervy. And
sweating it lightly. I think they would be grabbing Rutherford if they had hands.
And as soon as they, Rutherford's apparently visited with them before. Apparently has gone swimming before.
Okay, at least they are definitely aware of it.
They make some comment about like his broad shoulders and want to go for a swim.
He looks sweaty. Should jump in the water.
And like one of the whales is named Matt, and it's just, I mean, it's brilliant. It's hysterical. But let's talk about sexual harassment.
Yeah, there are. If this were a real life work environment, this is definitely a can of worms. It's like a can of worms within a can of worms, actually. So we'll start with the outer can of worms, which is this is workplace sexual harassment. So now I just want to posit that Rutherford does seem to be fine with this. It is possible that this is not an unwanted sexual advance.
They seem to have a good relationship with each other.
So it is possible that this is not, but given that he seems to be consistently turning it down, I'm going to go forward that it may be an unwanted sexual advance.
He might say something to the effect of like, "Not now, guys," or something. It's just, I mean, you want to go swim with the girls in season 1 and it's like, God bless them that if that didn't work out, but apparently the whales love hanging out with them. So, but the way that they interact with them is
this is a problem. So this is a problem.
So we have him. You look sweaty. You also have like after like some mission, it's great to go skinny dipping. Like it's just like whoa.
If you transposed this to a human environment on Earth in a workplace, this would be HR would be like tripping over themselves to try to get this person to shut up. So
this sort of behavior is why governors resign. So.
Yes. So I just to go through a couple of the nuts and bolts really quick, because this is the legal geeks. We're going to talk about the law. So under anti-discrimination statutes, including Title VII, Equal Pay Act, things like that, what you have is essentially that there has to be discrimination against a person on the basis of a protected status, and status includes, or class includes sex, sexuality. After I think it was Bostock was the case that held that for Title VII, and also includes race, religion, etc. There's like a whole slew of things that it can include. One of the things under Title VII that counts as essentially sex discrimination is a hostile work environment created on the basis of sex. And in this case, I would posit that, and this is just kind of an ordinary garden variety sexual harassment, that these belugas are particularly attracted to Rutherford, it seems. And Josh and I spent some time trying to figure out whether or not it was specifically Rutherford, or it was just like all the males, or that he was of color. But it seems like they had, between the 4 main characters, quite a lot of people to pick from, and they picked Rutherford. So
Tendi, Mariner, and Boimler.
Right. So it's not just that they're going after the boys, but
are all ignored.
Yes.
Like they are. It's like, yeah, whatever. It's like, hello. And
but an unwanted sexual advance like this, especially it's happening repeatedly just in this scene, is going to count as a hostile work environment.
so let's talk about the jury instructions from California on how to prove that. So we get the first element that you have to set the stage, that that the behavior by the belugas created a work environment that was hostile, intimidating, offensive, oppressive, or abusive, and that that Rutherford was an employee of a person or providing services under a contract, or an unpaid intern, or a volunteer with. So like
Worked for.
Yeah, they're definitely. I think the belugas were lieutenants or lieutenants.
Yeah,
They had more than one pip. So you do have a superior officer issue as well, and
that is a really good point.
And then Rutherford is subjected to harassing conduct.
I just want to note that it doesn't have to be an employment superior in order for this to be harassment to continue.
Yeah, exactly, because
that is not a requirement.
We don't want
people, worse, but it's not a requirement.
We don't want people to think that you can get a free pass of like, look, I just worked with him.
Or not to make a sexual injury, I work under him. Sorry, but like you can totally imagine, right? Like an inferior employee with a boss, and they keep making advances to the boss. Hey, so you look really nice in that shirt there, or you look really great in that blouse or skirt, or what have you. If they keep doing that, it can create a hostile work environment. It doesn't matter that they don't have power over that person.
Yeah, it's one thing to go like, dude, great hat. It's something else to go wrong. Mm-hmm. Just no, just no. And the whales do cross that line a couple times. So is that harassing conduct severe or pervasive?
So given that, I mean, the general attitude that they approach this scene with is that this seems to be normal for the belugas. I'm going to guess it's probably not the first time they've done this. So it is a defense that it's just an isolated incident. For example, if this happens once, but I'm going to guess this is not the first time.
No, I think they've taken them out for drinks a couple times. It's yeah, there's a lot there. And it's weird. I still want to hang out with them, but
like I said, he seems to be fine with it, which is probably why they're still there. But continue.
Yeah, but let's talk about the fact that we have Starfleet officers who are whales.
Yeah.
And they're hanging out in a big tank. So Star Trek Enterprise introduced the Xindi, who had an aquatic species, and they looked like big whales, and they had big spaceships. Star Trek 4, again, we got that whale theme again. So it makes sense that we got some whales who are into astronomy. Not all the equipment down there is designed for flippers.
And in fact, most of it seems to not be designed for flippers.
And they take great offense at that. So when you look at how welcoming Starfleet is with making reasonable accommodations for different species.
Yes.
How does that work?
So when it comes to making reasonable accommodations, essentially, the first thing I want to point out here is that an employer under the ADA doesn't have to make everything in their workplace or every role in their workplace available for somebody with a disability to do. What the ADA does protect is that if an employee who has a disability could do one of the jobs for the employer, and it is not an unreasonable accommodation for the employer to reassign them to that, or reasonable accommodation is actually extremely broad. It's intentionally not specifically defined. So it's essentially as long as the inconvenience or expense incurred by the employer in order to make something accessible to the disabled employee is not unreasonable, they should do it. I have to say, Josh, that making some of these handles and other things accessible to a beluga, because it doesn't have to be flipper accessible, it could be mouth. Yeah. Say that Starfleet's General Counsel or JAG should take a look at that, because there could be an ADA problem there. There's another interesting ADA wrinkle to what's going on here too, which is the fact that these belugas seem to be isolated from the rest of the crew. This is the first time we've seen them. I don't think they can swim out of their tank.
Do they have EVA suits? Like, how do they? I mean, we might now see that. Do they get like a big like hamster ball?
I know, that's what I'm kind of hoping.
Goes down companion ways. I mean, again, who wouldn't like a beluga whale as a friend?
And there was an episode of Deep Space Nine, I think, that involved a officer who came from a super low gravity planet and so needed to walk around. So you could have a similar thing where they would need to essentially have something that nullified gravity in a little localized space around them so they could swim through the ship.
Well, again, when they rescue Boimler,
yes,
they get him up to the surface. They do make comments about like keep him wet so he doesn't dry
his
out.
blowhole is broken.
Again, it's just so damn funny.
But what I wondered is whether or not they were isolated in this particular area because maybe it is also a condition or a trait of their species that they cannot contain themselves from saying sexually licentious things, which uncontrolled would create a hostile work environment. If the employer is aware of it, then they would have a duty to do something about it. We didn't quite finish going through because it's kind of a long list of jury instructions, but if you want to hold an employer liable for an employee of theirs sexually harassing others or discriminating against others, the employer has to have been aware of it or at least have processes in place that should have done that. In any event, without getting into too much detail, it's possible that Starfleet was aware that these whales had this problem, and in order to create so there is actually a bit of a real life analogy here, which is Tourette's.
Yeah, not Cuomo.
No.
Tourette's.
Which is a recognized disability in which a person has an uncontrollable reflex urge to make a sound or even often strings of words. And so it could be that they have, as a recognized disability, the inability to control themselves from saying the sexual things that pop into their head. And so in order to accommodate them, Starfleet has put them in their own office, essentially, so that they won't be creating a hostile work environment.
Yeah, and I don't think that's the case because they leave Tendi, Mariner, and Boimler alone. They're just very into Rutherford.
Yeah, that does seem to be the case.
So, I mean, E for effort, but I don't think they're, it's just they like hanging out with Rutherford.
I'm going to just posit again that maybe the saving grace here is that it is not an unwanted thing. That maybe the reason they're not saying these things to Boimler and Mariner and Tendi is not because they don't also think those things about them, but because they know Rutherford and they know he's fine with it.
Yeah, they like hanging out. So cool. Yeah, it's just don't ask people to skinny dip. That's a great way to get pepper sprayed and sued and just
unless you're really close friends with the person and you know for a fact that is not an unwanted thing.
Sounds like a disaster.
Yeah, you should be very careful.
Again.
And you will probably get in trouble with HR even if the person is fine with it.
Definitely not at work. So many horrible things.
Like it's a can of worms inside a can of worms with another little worm hiding somewhere inside there.
That said, this long-running gag worked, and it was a lot of fun. It's like, oh my, wow, okay. And it going to the idea of,
is this the cetacean lab?
Yeah.
Yo! Thank you, because I remember they referenced that before. Hey, come, we're gonna go for a swim in the cetacean. I get it now.
So yeah, so it exists.
Yep.
And they're wearing blue, so they're science division.
And it's a lab, but not to study the cetaceans. It's a lab for the cetaceans. That's so great.
It's awesome.
I'm so glad I had this realization on live streaming.
You can see her lighting up in real time. God bless us, everyone. So, if you recall sci-fi shows from the 90s, there was Sequest DSV. And they had Darwin the dolphin, who was like the captain's pet crew member, navigator, but they had like aqueducts throughout the ship. So the dolphin could swim around and come up in different pools and interact. They don't have that on the Cerritos.
As far as we know, this is the only little bit of water.
and
water.
And when you throw in the fact that there are aquatic Xindi, then that by this time they should be members of the Federation. The Xindi War is 100 years in the past. even though it's a while before Enterprise J and in fighting the Sphere of Builders, but those are Enterprise references. They have the tech, or at least they know where they can get the tech.
Mm-hmm.
So the issue then is how many beluga whales are in Starfleet? And on that matter, how many aquatic species are in Starfleet? Because you can have more than one.
Mm-hmm.
It's like with having an aquarium at home. Is it tropical? Is it brackish? What kind of fish do you have in there as opposed to mammals?
Mm-hmm.
So, there are temperature requirements and all that fun stuff. So it's interesting to think about ship design that is now taking aquatic species into consideration. I find that fascinating.
Yeah.
So let's get to the fact that I think that the creators of this show love lawyers, and I do want to give them all a hug because season 3 might begin with a trial, and I am completely down.
Yes.
Down for that. If you guys need any advice on how to put the trial together, we're here. We're available.
If you want any guest voice actors, we would be very available.
Listen to us and you know how we sound.
Any and all participation, we are available.
Absolutely, positively. But more importantly, we're lawyers and we actually know how this stuff should work. So we have Starfleet Security board the ship.
Mm-hmm.
They say that they have proof from a reliable source. They don't that the captain was part of
a Klingon conspiracy, I think.
Rogue Klingon conspiracy to blow up planet Pakled.
Mm-hmm.
Or Pakled.
Pakled planet, yep. They're very good at naming things.
Very smurfy. And down to a couple photos that they show. And then they walk her out in handcuffs in front of her crew,
Mm-hmm.
who thought that she was getting promoted and they wanted to do like the nice send off. So, lawyer mode kicks in. There's a lot to unpack with this. First off, let's talk about the Fourth Amendment on what is necessary for a lawful arrest and whether or not that happened here.
Yes.
So the Federation should have some form of the Fourth Amendment. For those who don't know it by heart, we'll read it. The Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution states the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation. God, I always choke on that one. And particularly describing the place to be searched and the person or thing to be seized. Amendment 4. Notice we put that, it's in the top 5 for a reason. We were very freaked out about the Star Chamber, and it raises the question of like, hey, what's probable cause? What's that standard? Well, there has to be evidence. And this is, the test for probable cause is an objective standard.
Mm-hmm.
And it exists where facts and circumstances within an officer's knowledge and of which they had reasonably trustworthy information are sufficient in themselves to warrant a man of reasonable caution in the belief that an offense has been or is being committed.
Mm-hmm.
You clerked for a federal judge. Did you have any probable cause cases that you might have?
So because I clerked for a judge on the federal circuit, we did not deal with any criminal cases.
No, you would not have.
My judge did sit by designation in the District of Delaware, but we still dealt with civil cases there as well. So I did not directly deal with this type of matter, but it is something that's fundamental. We do study it as lawyers when we're in law school, when we're studying for the bar. I do hope at some point to work in the criminal field, at least in some point in the future, perhaps in a pro bono capacity. But in any event, this is a really fundamental part of our system of laws and it's part of the Bill of Rights, which I believe is the first, I'm trying to remember, is it first 12? First 12, yeah.
Yep, first 10.
There we go. Thank you. First 10 amendments to the Constitution.
After the election of 1800, we made some changes.
Yes, that's right. That's right. But so, we joke a little bit about like, it's in the top 5, but like, so the numbers don't necessarily actually mean something except that it is in the Bill of Rights. So it was essentially a condition to the states ratifying the Constitution, is that the Bill of Rights was accompanying it. They were enacted at basically the same time. And so probable cause is distinguished from reasonable suspicion in our case.
Higher standards, like reasonable, that's like a stop.
Yes. So in order for a law enforcement officer to stop a person, so literally like a traffic stop, you're walking on the street and a police officer puts up their hand and says, hey, can I'd like to just check your bag, or I'd like to, well, not check your bag. What are you doing here? Or who are you? Just any kind of stop. There has to be reasonable suspicion, which means that, and this is objective subjective, right? The officer has to subjectively actually hold a reasonable suspicion that you are or involved in the process of committing, have committed, or about to commit some kind of offense. In order to actually search, that includes, like I just retracted, searching your bag, in order to search your trunk, anything like that, you have to have instead probable cause. And in order to detain someone, so a stop, this has all been fleshed out in case law. You're not going to find this in the Fourth Amendment itself. But there's essentially a temporal difference, right, between an officer stopping someone, which is for a relatively short period of time, and detaining someone. So that could include a stop that goes on for hours, right? Even though if they never take you into, they don't take you downtown to the actual jailhouse or police station, but they still keep you in place for a long period of time. And it's definitely if they then put you in their car or take you down to the station and put you in a cell. Those are all definitely detentions. And for detention or searching, you have to have probable cause instead of reasonable suspicion. Now, you will also note that in the Fourth Amendment, it talks about probable cause for warrants, but we have since held that includes, a warrant is now essentially just a judge signing off on the police's belief that they have probable cause to do something. It just kind of creates an initial guarantee, an imprimatur that they have the probable cause. It's not literally a guarantee, because you do often find out later that they did not actually have the evidence they claim to have, etc. But it is an imprimatur that they have probable cause in order to go search something. In many circumstances, though, a police officer is not going to be able to go call up the judge and say, hey, I think I have probable cause to search this person's trunk, for example. So it is just in general a rule for detentions and for searches.
So we now move up to appearing before a magistrate. And when that happens, like you can kind of prove up, start challenging, like, why am I here? Because that goes to the system that we have. And we know that's the Federation, is
largely modeled off of.
Yeah, it's when you look at Roddenberry and the view of the greatest generation, the promise of the 1960s, problems can be conquered, and we can have a bright future together. Like, we're all on board with that. With this, I start thinking in terms of like, how do we attack this? Now, first off, for the JAG officer, prosecutors have a heightened ethical duties than the civil lawyers, because you're not supposed to charge people unless you are really sure, like you have true probable cause. And the way that this is described when they arrest Captain Freeman, I would go on the warpath about that pretty quickly. It's like, where'd this come from?
How reliable is your source? How do you, who is your source? How do you know they're reliable?
Yeah, it's even security, they're sounding like dumb cops with sure, we know you were here, but that was probably part of a plan. Probably part of a plan.
I just want to point out also that perfectly highlights the problem with conspiracy theories, which is if everything proves that you were part of this bad thing, it proves too much. It means that you're not actually saying anything. So if the fact that she was not there during this bombing somehow also proves that she was in on this conspiracy to do this bombing, you've got a problem with your logic.
Now, I'm all on board for cross-examining, and it would be a brutal cross-examination of the security officer. It's like, okay, let's go.
And there's still a lot of facts that we don't know, so we'll have to wait to see the premiere of season 3 to see what evidence they actually are going to line up. But there are some things, Josh, that we can talk about that as defense lawyers you would strategize about, even not knowing those facts, That includes, like you were saying, attacking whether or not there was probable cause just for this initial charging and arrest.
Well, that, and the state has to turn over the evidence that they have.
Yes.
So, because again, that's Star Chamber type scary situation. But it's like, okay, this is where my e-discovery knowledge comes in. You guys are putting up photos? All right, let's dig into the metadata. Who took those? When were they taken? What's the history of those images?
Yeah, how did you get that?
Yeah.
Because if it was dropped at our, mailbox by a mysterious cloaked individual, there's some red flags there.
That means, who's your credible source?
Yes.
Okay, like this is sounding more like Section 31 trying to screw someone and being able to go like, we thought the Packlids were a threat, so we decided to blow up the planet, and we'll just
pin it on someone who we find inconvenient, maybe.
Yeah, who the only Federation captain that went to the planet trying to do peace talks. So she's the only one that we figured that we could pin this on.
I want to highlight one thing that you mentioned, Josh, which is also discovery in criminal cases is a little bit different in the sense that there is a legal obligation to turn over evidence relating to both evidence that relates to guilt and potentially exculpatory evidence. And this is actually a bit of an issue in our justice system, that it is up to prosecutors to decide what evidence is potentially exculpatory when they hand it over. And it is subject to a lot of abuse, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's heavily litigated when people are lucky enough to have good lawyers, when defendants are lucky enough to have good lawyers. But it's something that, ultimately one of the big solutions is not just litigation, but as citizens, to try to hold prosecutors accountable when they're not living up to their ethical obligations. And this is fundamentally not just a legal obligation, but an ethical obligation. There's also a problem of turning it over on the eve of trial, as opposed to when there's a reasonable amount of time for the defense lawyer to go through it and try to figure out if any of the evidence does support the client's or defendant's innocence. And this is highlighting a very important premise of our legal system, which is that you are innocent until proven guilty. The fact that you have been charged, in fact, gives you additional rights. It doesn't take away rights simply because you have been accused of something by the government. And if I'm not skipping ahead, I wanted to talk about one thing in this episode that does kind of strike a little bit at that.
Yeah. And then I want to talk about the trial strategy on what we do for trial prep. So go for it.
Okay, so just really quickly, I wanted to mention briefly that this episode is a great highlight of a problem that does kind of attack that fundamental premise of innocent until proven guilty, which is the perp walk. So Captain Freeman here is arrested in a very public way. I don't know for sure that Starfleet Security knew that there was going to be her whole crew around. They certainly knew that there was going to be some crew in the room when they arrested her. But this is something that actually happens in our justice system. It certainly came in vogue since about the 80s, which is to essentially make the charging and the arrest part of the punishment itself, by making it extremely public. Now, granted, in a world in which we all have cell phone cameras, it's going to be very difficult for the police not to arrest someone where there's a camera or someone with an internet connection around. But there has been a habit, especially since we talked about this, the 80s, starting potentially with Giuliani, of calling up the press before you make an arrest in order to make a spectacle of it.
And this was before he was doing it in front of gardening stores next to a sex shop.
Yes. But so it is not a coincidence when there are 5 different news cameras, right, that are standing outside of a house when somebody gets arrested by the FBI.
Yeah, we don't want the feds, we don't want law enforcement putting out a press release that they're going to arrest someone.
Because there has been no adjudication of guilt. And that kind of reputational harm or just embarrassment is a real form of punishment, or can be. And it can cause an otherwise innocent person to cooperate with law enforcement in a way that they wouldn't be obligated to because they've done nothing wrong, because law enforcement can hold out a potential punishment when there's been no process done in order to establish any kind of guilt of anything.
Yeah, it's just cruelty for the sake of cruelty. I don't think they intended it.
No, but it's just this is just a way to highlight an issue. And again, this is one of those things where ultimately the best solution is to just vote out prosecutors that do not live up to their ethical obligations, like it would be if they actually knew that the crew was going to be out there and did this deliberately.
Yes. So let's go to trial prep. First off, they don't give her any Miranda rights, and the military does have a version of that. It's a little different, But
Article 31, which is actually a little broader in some important ways than civilian Miranda rights, in the sense that in order for there to be a legal requirement that a person is Mirandized, meaning they are read their Miranda rights, that would be you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to an attorney, like all those things you do see in movies and TV. Fortunately, they do often Mirandize people. But in order for that requirement to kick in, a person has to be in custody of law enforcement. So there has to have been the decision made to actually detain the person, not just stop them.
They put cuffs on her.
Oh yes, there is no question that an arrest, a detention has been made.
Yeah.
In Article 31, it doesn't actually have to be a detention. You could just be stopping someone to ask them questions. And it also doesn't have to be a law enforcement branch of the military. It could be any officer. So it's a little bit broader in some respects. Tom Harper, if you're watching, you can correct me if I'm missing details. I am filling in for you, buddy, because I am not as much of an expert as you.
Tom's our JAG officer.
But yes, it is in some ways at least broader. But they do have a requirement for sure that is at least as strong as we have in the civilian world.
So come out swinging there, because that just shows a blatant disregard for civil rights. So judges tend to get upset about that. So that's going to be one opening swing. The other part of this that my trial team would include a computer forensic expert and a private eye, someone to actually go out and do field work.
Oh yeah, this is important to note that, even the best intending prosecutor with the greatest intentions, their job is not to find all the evidence that proves someone innocent. So even if they're doing a fulsome investigation, they may not pursue the same kind of avenues that an investigator would if they were instead setting out to prove someone's innocence.
Yeah, and when you look at the Packlids, the fact that they had an act of espionage take place aboard the Cerritos, granted badly, but we found out that
Maybe
guy,
not as badly as we thought.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, but their goal was to get plant a bomb on the Federation. I don't remember what was Earth itself, but they wanted to use a WMD of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
Did they blow themselves up?
I think that's highly probable. Given that they didn't know how the bombs worked in the previous episode with it's a single-use device.
So the fact that we have Friedman who's been reporting on them, who had multiple firefights with them for her and did peace negotiations, the fact that they go after her is highly questionable, because we want to prove the case that she is not guilty and that the state has failed to meet its burden of beyond a reasonable doubt, because there's plenty of doubt. It doesn't make sense. Even if you want to take the position of like, oh, it was clearly planned, again, the crazy conspiracy thinking, that she's this criminal mastermind who, while trying to save a ship from destruction and a civilization at the same time, can also plan an attack on a second one with nobody else. Okay.
And this highlights also another ethical obligation by prosecutors, which is not to try someone for charges if they don't believe that they can prove those charges beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah, this is riddled with doubt. So the prosecutor who,
at least given what we know
so far,
we'll see what happens. But yeah, and I definitely want to highlight for what we do find out perhaps in the next episode, which is, all of the things that we're talking about, if you're going to have mounted defense, and I assume that the crew of the Cerritos is going to essentially fill the role here of private eye of investigating. But I was going to say, that's what I was going to say. Speaking of Article 31, my current theory is that this is, in fact, like you were saying, Section 31. And my theory is that they decided to pin this on Captain Freeman, not only because she was the only Federation captain that we know of to have even visited the planet, but that she might actually have some ability to disprove that it was a Klingon conspiracy or whatever the Section 31 is saying. So she might have information, maybe not yet be aware of it, but might be able to prove Section 31's involvement. So they're trying to take her out of the picture, make her discredit her immediately.
I think we can also write out the Klingons as trying to frame her, because that sounds like a very Romulan thing to do, and there's no honor in that. With so we're going to take out a good captain.
It's at least a rogue Klingon It can't be Klingon Empire.
No, it doesn't make sense. So like it's not in their character. So you get that, and which highly dictates their national policy. Like they just don't do that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And like, sure, they got cloaking devices, but they have to decloak the fire. And this is not something that they would do. It's very Romulan, and it's very Section 31.
It might be Cardassian too.
Yeah, but at this point, Garrett should be the leader of the Cardassian.
That's right.
Government after the Dominion War. So,
but it could be rogue Cardassian, is my point.
There could be, yeah, it's like after a government's been decimated and the planet obliterated a couple times over, things would change. So there's that. Things would get messy. But I'm looking forward to see what facts they have, because this could be a trial episode that we actually get to see, which is
maybe a multi-episode court-martial involving an episode or two to try to find out the truth of the matter and then eventually confront the wrongdoers in court.
Yeah, because trials aren't quick. Like, you need discovery. So, and I'm not talking the show. I'm talking.
Oh, yes.
You need discovery to find out what the hell's going on.
And also, it is an artifact of entertainment that we get in trials. It is often that you get like the surprise evidence or the surprise witness. In general, that does not happen. There are important kind of like what we were just talking about with the prosecutors have to turn over evidence with a reasonable amount of time. Unless there is a really good extenuating circumstance for why you couldn't get the evidence and show it to the opposing side before trial starts, you're generally not going to get your surprise. You may have a really compelling surprise witness or surprise evidence, but like I said, unless you can justify it to the judge why you could not produce it beforehand, you're probably not going to get it in. However, it is extremely entertaining. So this is why it always happens in these things, including in, I believe, like the trial of Data. There was some, unexpected evidence and witnesses that got called, things like that.
Yeah, because that's compelling TV. But I would go on the warpath on the admissibility of the photos and the evidence, because that's one way to knock out the probable cause, to sound like this is garbage.
Yes.
And that there's no there. And do it Samuel T. Cogley style too. I want to have some flair, which again would be fun. Every Star Trek series has at least one trial, and they
kind of already had one, although it wasn't a Federation trial.
No, a scary alien trial that was.
Which was still fun. It was a fun episode for us to cover.
Yes, absolutely. So like they've met the bar, but
they need an actual Federation court-martial trial because those are way more fun.
And we know about the law, so again, we would be more than happy to tag in.
Mm-hmm.
That said,
if you need any helpful suggestions or consultations,
that said, this season has just been so much fun, and
I cannot tell you, Josh, just how much fun it's been to watch this. This is so fantastic.
Yeah, it's agreed, and we will be at our first event since March 2020, because we went to San Diego Comic Fest before everything shut down. So we were literally one of the last events of 2020.
Although for me, I think the last time was
Denver
in 2019. So it's been like 2 years for me. I think it's been literally oh my God, yeah.
So we are returning to Denver for Denver Fan Expo, I think. Fan Expo. They went through a name change. They were Pop Culture Con, but then they became Fan Expo Special Edition, because it's over Halloween weekend, and we will have 3 panels. And so the first panel is on Saturday. It's on Lower Decks at 2:30. Binari and I and Molly Beth, who is a lawyer with the USPTO, and hardcore Trek nerd herself, and that's going to be a rip-roaring good time as we cover both seasons of Lower Decks and some our favorite issues that we have. We also have some more on Saturday, digging into WandaVision, and then Universal Monsters, because hey, it's Halloween, and that will include a special guest, the Colorado Attorney General. So yes, we're going to have a fantastic time. He is spending this weekend watching Universal Monster movies, and I can't help but just highly admire that.
Yes.
He's such a nice man, great civil servant, everything that you want, and it's just like he's nice and smart.
And is doing his homework.
That-
Hardworking.
It's like I mean, when you look at his campaign, it's like, okay, you actually believe everything you said, and you're doing a good job. So I really admire that, and I look forward to getting to talk Universal Monsters with him. So, so with that, everyone, stay safe, stay healthy, stay geeky, and until then, look in person. We're real. So,
Yes.
take care, everyone. Good night.